Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Extreme Hangout. I cannot believe this is our last session here at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, but I cannot think of anything that I would, or a panel that I would rather close with, because we have got a fantastic group of young ladies here who are here to celebrate the launch of Youthtopia Younite and your annual event. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over Mitzi, who's going to lead this session. So please put your hands together and welcome the ladies to the stage.
Hi. Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Just as mentioned, this is a special kickoff for Youththopia's annual event, Younite. It is day 1 out of 17 days, which will be covering the 17 different SDGs, challenges and solutions through the eyes of the Gen Z. And I have an amazing panel of speakers with me, and I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Alab Mirasol Airosa from the Philippines.
Hello everyone, I'm Alab. I'm from the Philippines. I'm 22 and I'm the National Coordinator for Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, or YACAP. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Tyrion. I'm from Singapore and I run the Instagram page The Weird and Wild, where I do a lot of science communications with illustration.
Hello, my name is Leah Wyman. I'm a eco-activist and spokesperson for Youth for Ecocide, and really excited to be here talking a bit about ecocide and activism and being alongside these wonderful women here. So yeah, excited for the discussion.
Hi everyone, I am Adriana Calderon. I am a youth activist from Mexico. I work with Fridays for Future Mexico and Fridays for Future MAPA.
And I am Mitzi. I am also with Fridays for Future MAPA, but also with YACAP, Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. And you all have been here at COP27 for the past week. My first question is, what are your first impressions of the UN Climate Summit so far?
I was at COP last year, and I always say that I don't believe that the change comes from the conference or from the people discussing inside. I saw so much power today at the actions, at the Blue Flood and at the Youth Action. So I believe that that's where the power comes from, and that's where the energy should be directed to. But from a national perspective, my president is not here. No one from Mexico who's leading negotiations is here. So I do believe that from my national Mexican side, there's nothing happening, and that disappoints me.
Yeah, it's actually my first COP, so it's really interesting to see watching all of these conferences. I mean, I was in Glasgow last year, but mostly on the streets as an activist, and sort of to see how it happened, what's happening inside. And yeah, it is frustrating, I think, because there are things that are exciting. For example, that like loss and damage was for the first time put on the agenda, and things that like there's a youth pavilion for the first time, but it's still so strange that it's only happening now. And at the end of the day, these are all symbolic actions if there's no, like symbolic words if there's no true action behind it. And so far we've not really seen any significant outcome mid COP. So it is very worrying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I guess, in Singapore, we are having our first pavilion this year, and it's also my first COP. So that was very exciting. Also because I was just talking to Alep that in Southeast Asia, if you look at the number of pavilions there are from Southeast Asia, there are only 4. So it's only Singapore, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And I thought that was, I mean, out of the hundreds of pavilions, if there are only 4 from Southeast Asia, and this is a region that is disproportionately affected by climate change, how is it that we're not represented, and we're also not given, I guess, a platform to be able to be more visible, especially when so much disaster is happening in their area, and there's also so much complexity, even when it comes to talking about divesting from fossil fuels or other extractive or pollutive industries, where so many people rely on those things for a living in the region. So I think I've been feeling isolated, but at the same time also grateful that I'm here, and hopefully that maybe this could be a platform for me to learn on how to figure out what it means to be Southeast Asian in these negotiations?
Hello. For me, it's also my first COP, and what's disappointing to me is the accessibility of COP or this summit. It's supposed to be where the leaders of the world will be here and negotiate, right? But when it comes to representation, as Shian just said, we can see that it's already difficult getting here. But when you get here, it's also the matter of sustaining yourself. Everything here is expensive. How do we expect that us youth activists would sustain ourselves and be here and share our stories if we can't afford it? So I think that's something really disappointing to see, and also it's something we should talk about.
I think a lot of you have already talked about the barriers that we've been facing here in COP, in the UN Climate Summit, but also in general. I feel like some of the things that you've said are things that happen even back home and even in our own campaigns. I wanted to ask you guys, what are the barriers that you've experienced in your time as campaigners and as activists? You want to start this time, Alan?
Well, generally, in our campaigns, we want to be able to reach the broadest of all people, right? But it's a matter of whether we can speak about it or not, especially here in a country where there is some repression, and we have to follow some rules in order for us to stay safe. In my country, in the Philippines, it's also a matter of life or death. You can either be tagged as a terrorist if you speak up for what you believe in, or if you stand for people's rights or for people's campaigns, and it's a danger that is posed on us activists.
Yeah, I think I relate a lot to the cultural context in which activism takes place. In Singapore, technically, you're only legal to protest in a certain area, and you also have to apply for permits. So any kind of activism has to happen within certain limits, and that's just a legal process. And at the same time, I think it's also about feeling this culture of, a fear of speaking out because you don't know what's going to happen to you. And some of this could be learned from society. It might not even be something that I could have felt that, there is a danger. But because there's all these things, then there are just beliefs that you have to unlearn on what does activism look like, and what kind of activism is effective in the region also looks very different. So I use a lot of social media, and I think that that has become a space for a lot of young activists in Singapore to be able to talk about the work that we do or rally support. But beyond that, sometimes I also wonder how, what does community organizing look like in this context, and how can we keep each other safe?
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I also wanted to say, I think something that is difficult as youth activists is, yes, this is a growing movement and it's wonderful. I think this is one of the wonderful things of COPs or conferences like this, is actually meeting fellow young activists and having that feeling of community, and supporting each other and hearing the stories from different countries and sharing that. And I think that is powerful. But at the same time, I think it's often still, youth voices can often still be very tokenized and still very, yes, maybe we're observer at a COP, but how does that actually then influence negotiations? And I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in actually getting youth to decide on their future really and be active and present in negotiations rather than just being there, and sort of being used. Okay, we have a certain amount of youth representatives here, and I think that's something that across the world really needs to change nationally and internationally.
For me, it's different. There's a lot of cultural background because Mexico now is the most deadliest place to be an activist, well, an environmental defender. And also, to sum that, we also have a really conservative country that believes that the fossil fuel industry is the one that is going to save the country, and that exploitation and profit out of the nature is the best way out of growing the economy. So it's really hard to get the public on board and get them to care about climate and get them to, for example, we have a campaign called Pemex No Te Ama, which is against the #1 fossil fuel industry in Mexico, and they are the #8 polluters in the world. And we were trying to make them lower their emissions, but then we got a lot of backlash from the president supporters, and then we got a lot of backlash from the public in general. The deputies don't support our campaigns and stuff like that. So the political environment is also not really helpful towards the environment. And then to sum up with the dangers of being an activist, it feels really, really challenging, but at the same time, it feels like we are going there to some point, but still we are struggling to find it.
Thank you. Leia, I wanted to ask you, because you are working a lot on policy change, especially with Stop Ecocide and law and changing the law. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so ecocide, well, eco comes from oikos, which means home, and side is killing. So really it is about the killing of our home, our future, our livelihood. And it was defined by an independent expert panel. And I'm quickly going to read it out because it's really super short. And it's unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there's a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. So really it tries to capture the worst crimes that are being committed against our earth. And we currently, it is still legal to kill the environment and to kill our future. And especially I think we have very powerful corporate interests in the world that are really hard to regulate, especially sometimes at national levels. Yes, if there's stronger environmental policies in one country, companies can move to another country. And ecocide law is a way, especially at an international level, which is what Stop Ecocide campaigns for, to capture that and to say that that's not morally or legally okay, just like murder isn't accepted. It's not acceptable to kill our planet. And yes, the initiative is really all about bringing ecocide into the International Criminal Court as the fifth crime in the Rome Statute. Yes, and I think it's very exciting because it's actually something that is super simple, but it's also a legal framework that would change moral and legal perspectives around what is actually allowed.
Thank you. I think I just want to emphasize on how ecocide has to be that international agreement, because otherwise, as mentioned already, the global north will export their exploitation into our countries. The global north will, because the global north usually has safer environmental laws and also workers' laws and workers' rights, they will put their factories in our countries, they will put the destruction in our countries, and they are the ones that are destroying the environmental defenders and activists that Alab and Adriana mentioned earlier. It's very important to have that connection that with ecocide, the people that are protecting and trying to stop the murder of the planet are being murdered themselves. And Adriana, I know you've worked on this issue with the Escazú campaign and with environmental defenders in Mexico. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
So we have this agreement in Latin America and the Caribbean called the Escazú Agreement, which was made in Escazú in Colombia and a couple of years ago, and it's to protect environmental defenders from getting their land stolen, like informing the public about what's happening with the environment in Latin America. So it was a challenge to get it ratified, because you need to get it ratified so it passes and starts being applied in countries. Because aside from needing an ecocide law, I feel like we need legal protection for environmental defenders, because if not, it also happens that they are the one protecting their resources, their land, and then they get stolen from it, and they're just fighting for their basic rights. So with Escazú, what we managed to do is Mexico ratifying the ratification, but then nothing has happened. We're still one of the most dangerous places. We are still being, our resources are still being extracted by Canadian mining, Coca-Cola, and others. But yeah, for me, it's Escazú needs to be a reality, not only in Latin America, but in other countries around the world, maybe Asia or stuff like that. It cannot be Escazú, but it can be a similar framing, similar so it protects its environmental activists and defenders.
Thank you. And it's so crucial that when we talk about biodiversity and protection around that, we have our indigenous peoples and environmental defenders at the front line and center of that conversation, because we have conservation laws that are being pushed like 30 by 30, but what happens is indigenous peoples are considered to be people who are destroying that protected area, and they're kicked out of their lands because of it. So it's so crucial that in everything that we talk about and do, it's always centering the people on the front lines. And it's always so interesting, I guess is the word, where we see that in countries with a lot of repression, there's a lot of creativity that comes out of activism. And Chiyun and Alab, I know you both use art and creativity to get that message across, especially Chiyun. So do you want to talk us through about how you use social media, how you use these graphics to explain this, and why you think it's so crucial that young people are empowered with this knowledge?
Yeah, I think I feel that art should be used in everywhere, I guess everywhere, any country, mainly because I remember reading a quote that talks about how art makes a movement irresistible. And mainly, I really got inspired because of this movement called, I think it was a campaign called the Youth v Gov in the US. And when they talked about their activism strategy, a key pillar was art. And I asked the campaigner, why did you make that something? Because whenever we talked about environmental activism, it's usually the technical science, the people, but art doesn't feature very heavily. And he said that's the real reason why sometimes when they go campaigning or when they go protesting, people join them because they see the aesthetics first and they say, this looks interesting, I want to be part of it. And that really got me thinking about what art can do when it comes to convincing people who might not feel as strongly about climate change or who might not have been inducted into the movement. And I started drawing like comics and illustration. And I guess I draw them in a way where I use like blobs, big eyes, cute characters, because on Instagram, it's very visual. And I hope that if someone reposts it and someone else sees it, they might stop to say, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to click in and take a look. And I felt that maybe if I did this in a certain way, more people would see climate change or climate issues as something that's not scary or too technical. But if I can draw it like a children's comic and they understand it, I think that's more important than putting out facts that they might feel very intimidated by. So I think that's my strategy.
Yeah, that's so fun because in the Philippines we have our climate strikes. So of course in our climate strikes we want to have a good message, right? We want to put it across. So we always have to think about what's the medium we want for the message to actually go across all the youth that we want to engage with. So we've tried different methods. So we've had a music gig with performances, and we've also held a fashion show just recently in September. So it's these kind of creative ways where we want to also bring in the campaigns of the people, of people's organizations. So it's not just about climate. We're making it intersectional. We're making it multi-sectoral. We're including all the other organizations that are also fighting for their own campaigns and connecting it and linking it to climate, because of course everything is connected to climate, and bringing that in such a creative way that more people would want to engage in. So it's very important. Yeah.
I always find it really cool how, when there is such strong repression, the youth's voice always comes out stronger. And that's true in every country, in every situation, in every community. When things get more difficult, we get more creative, and we come together and we unite with each other more. And of course, the title of our event today is The Power of Youth to Change the World. And a lot of what Youthtopia does actually is empowering young people to become activists. So what was something that you wish you knew when you started off as an activist? And I guess also say, like, when you started, like, how long ago was it? I'll let you guys think about that, because if you guys didn't know, we've gone off script. So none of these questions they've prepared for. I'm sorry. But what is something that you wish you knew when you started off?
So I grew up with a family, excuse me, full of activists. So my father and my mother are both activists. They're both organizers for peasant groups. And I think when I actually got into my own organizations when I was 18, it was a matter of realizing that, okay, it wasn't just my family who was into activism, and that it's a collective thing, and and you get to meet people there. It's not just the people I already knew when I was growing up, but it was the friends I could make along the way, and it's a great thing because it's growing. That's what activism is. It's not just it's not just a straight line, but it's something where it goes upwards because you're gonna have a new perspective of everything, of the whole world.
Yeah, I really agree with that because when I was younger, I really liked animals and I cared about it. And everyone in class would be like, this is the girl that likes the environment stuff. Everyone else, nobody wanted to join the environment club in like high school and primary school. So it felt very isolating. But I remember I started my activism more publicly only in 2018. That was when I don't even remember how old I was then, but yeah, and this was when I started to bring a lot of my activism online, and I really couldn't do it without friends that I met along the way. And Kate, who sits here, is another young person that everyone should meet. She was already online talking about the Bring Your Own movement and plastics, and that was when I remember thinking to myself, do I really want to put up my work on Instagram because that's so scary and it's public? And I meet people like that who say, yeah, why not you do something like that? And when I did it, you sort of attract other people who also care. And I think the advice I would give myself is that you're not really alone in this fight. You will find people when you put yourself out there. And I wish I did that a lot earlier.
Yeah, I really relate a little bit to those stories, especially because I guess the nice thing now about the movement is that it's sort of becoming more cool to care about the planet, and because it's our livelihood. And but it really wasn't always like that. And I think growing up, I always loved being outside, being in nature, having that connection to nature. But at the same time, I was also quite shy, and I didn't really know how do I engage with people on this topic, especially because somehow it was quite taboo really to talk about it with other people. But I think really through starting high school when I was around 13, I was like, no, I can't stay silent about this anymore because it's scary. It's scary going out there, putting your voice out there, but it's 100% worth it. And what I wish I'd really, like everyone knew about activism is that you don't really need a whole CV of things that you need to do to be an activist. Everyone can be an activist. It's about going out and using your voice or your talents to do that. And there's so many different ways that can be done. And I think something that I almost wish I'd put out earlier is I write poetry. So I just 2 years ago published a poetry book, and I almost wish I'd been braver enough to put some of that art out there, because I think it's a way to connect with people and to really have that shared experiences of what is happening in the world and inspire each other. How can we create an active sense of hope and use our voice and our art to create change?
Yeah, I feel that I really resonate with the words of not being alone and being creative. But for me, I want to speak more about being alone. Not being alone, sorry. I was 17 when I joined the movement, so I was still in high school. I didn't know anything about climate, just that my city was burning. So when I joined, I met Mitzi, and it just if I wanted to know something from there, I would have never imagined that I was going to be at COP27, to be honest. But I would tell myself that this is a constant growth, that I'm growing myself, I'm growing how I feel, how I think about the things that I believe, and it's a constant process of relearning stuff, and that I will always grow, but from that grow and degrowth, there's always going to be someone there supporting you, because there has always been someone there supporting me.
I'm gonna cry. I mean, for me, I think the key lesson we're gonna take away from this is that we aren't alone, right? We all of our panelists said it. It was the same for me. I didn't know that there would be this much love, just genuine care for each other. And I think for climate and environmental activists, that's why there's I feel like we're some of the people who love the most because there's so much climate anxiety. There's so much fear. Fear for a future that hasn't existed yet. Anxiety and sadness and grief for people that we haven't met or we don't know, right? For a lot of us, it's also the people that we've seen. We've experienced the impacts of the climate crisis, but there's also that collective pain and hurt for people that we don't know who have experienced the impacts of the climate crisis. And I feel like when you go into activism, your heart grows into it, and it just keeps growing, and that's why it also really hurts a lot of times. And I think that's something I wish I knew also in the beginning, that it's okay that it hurts, it's okay that it's painful. And something that was such crucial advice to me was that it's okay to grieve because something is being taken away from us. So cry, be with people that can comfort you but will also hold you accountable. That is so crucial when you're starting out your activism, that you find that community to be with. And you won't know where you find it. Sometimes it's online. Sometimes it's in spaces like this out of nowhere. Sometimes it's, you never know where you might find your community. But once you do, hold on to them and just keep growing together. With that, do we have any questions from the audience? It would be a waste if you guys don't. I just realized that all 4 of them all use art in different ways to communicate climate, and I didn't know that in the beginning, so I wish. Anyway, do you have any questions? Oh, yes.
Okay, let me quickly
Ooh.
Plug the book there.
Sorry, just briefly before the poetry, thank you all so much. It was really, really lovely to hear everything that you had to say. I'd love it if maybe you could explain a little bit more about Youthtopia and how other youth activism movements could help join the fight, because it's wonderful to hear that there are so many other youth groups out there, but I think we are all a lot stronger when we fight together, which is something you all said individually, but I think it could really be expanded to the movements themselves working together. So I'd love to hear about Youthtopia. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can share a little bit about Youthtopia. So Youthtopia really is an organization that's for youth and by youth. I'm not from Youthtopia, that's just a disclaimer, but I'm part of the Circle of Youth, where I think the Youthtopia team really organized a bunch of young people who are doing all sorts of different things, and they gather us into a space where we brainstorm, we work with the team, and also put out a lot of content that is free for other youths to access. So if you go to Youththopia's website, you will also find a lot of resources that they have recorded, and they make these things, even things like how do you prepare a speech, how do you talk about important issues in a very simple way, or how do you even gain confidence or think about gender and climate. And I think these are things that many people might not necessarily be able to find, and even if you have to find it, you have to dig through like all sorts of courses or YouTube videos, but they want to make it such that everyone can be a change maker and provide the resources for that. And I think they work closely with the Circle of Youth to curate some of this content, because they see that, hey, if you're doing certain things, why don't you talk about it so that more people can find out what it is. So I think Younite, which is the event that they have every year, sort of bring all those different people together and give out, it's free again, and it's online so that anyone can tune in from across the world.
And now we'll have the poetry reading, and then we'll close off after.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I will read a poem called What Now from my book Dear Earth, and it's actually completely non-for-profit, so all profits go to environmental charities. I do have a few copies, so if anyone is interested, you can come talk to me after. But yeah, I think it's a nice way sort of to end the panel, for us to sort of wonder about all the challenges that we're facing, and how we can collectively, create change. What now? So many problems, so many different challenges. It is easy to lose hope. It is easy to give up. Stick your head in the sand. It takes courage to recognize our mistakes. It takes strength to swim against the current. It takes vision to change. History is being written about you, about me, about all of us. Just because you can't do everything does not mean you can't do something. It is not just about protest. We all have unique talents and reaches. You can write letters, sign petitions, start projects, donate, paint, speak, write, connect, choose, act. Just do something. If you say you care, then show that you do. If you love anyone other than yourself, then show the world how much you do. Actions speak louder than words. Eco, not ego.
I think that is the perfect way to end this session. Thank you so much for having us, everyone.
Could we take a photo? Yeah.